Hello and welcome back to ELT Under the Covers in our continuing Teaching Masters series. In the Teaching Masters series, we look at individuals, educators that maybe the mainstream don't acknowledge so much, but that we consider to be quite masterful in their education of others in whatever topic or whatever subject that they are in. And we feel like there's lots of things that we can take from them, we can apply in the classroom. But before we kind of get into our this week's Teaching Masters, some brief introductions. I am Neil of Team Teacher fame, and I am joined by the ravishing, ravenous Rich.
Hello, everybody. It's ridiculous Rich here to rejuvenate your ravens.
And please leave some R adjectives, some nice R adjectives in the comments below, because I'm running out of them for these little brief intros here. But this week we are going to look at a teaching master. We are going to look at a certain Robert Kiyosaki. And to give you some idea of who he is, if you're not aware, we're going to cut now to a video of me kind of going into his background. Let's take a look.
Robert Kiyosaki is a famous American businessman, author, speaker, and financial educator. He is renowned for his inspiring book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and his subsequent book, Cash Flow Quadrant, along with the board game Cash Flow, which was based on that book. He first gained experience as an educator for a business education company, instructing their entrepreneurship and investing seminars. He later went on to found his own business and financial education companies under the brands Rich Dad and Cash Flow. And these were based on his own teaching principles that he previously outlined in those books that I mentioned and the board game. This video is not an endorsement of his seminars, as I don't believe that Robert runs his seminars anymore. I think more often they end up being franchisees. So I don't think that it's a very accurate reflection of his teaching in the past when he would run his own seminars. But what we do is we highly recommend his core books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Cash Flow Quadrant, and his board game as a great entry point into financial and business education.
Robert Kiyosaki, I've been following his stuff for a while now, and I like how what he does is he takes these big financial business concepts, investing concepts, and he's found a way to make them very simple. Gives a kind of a lot of first principles and makes it engaging and accessible. Because the Rich Dad Poor Dad is actually it feels more like a story than like a course book, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about that, isn't there? Like how much of the story is just invented and how much is like real stuff from his life.
Yeah, which I kind of think adds to the mystique, but what people lose track of is it's really just a device for learning. Does it really matter if it's false or factual, or if it's a little bit exaggerated, if it does the job of getting people a basic education in finances?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's perfectly okay to adapt stories for the classroom.
Yeah. I mean, we talked with Jamie Keddy recently, the master storyteller teacher, and he mines his own life for these stories, and I think he uses those as kind of like starting points to get others involved as well. And those stories,
Mm.
they might they might be kind of mundane, but the way that you kind of twist them or you present them allows sort of engagement with the teacher and also with the topic. So
Mm.
that's what we're all about. We're trying to get those learners hooked, and so we can kind of stick all that learning in their ears.
Well, I mean, that's one perspective. The other thing to say is like sometimes, especially with language teaching, you might specifically want a certain point to be highlighted, or you might think that, it'd be useful if like this was presented in this context, because then it's more obvious what it is if the learners have to guess the meaning from the context or whatever. So, you certainly have to, you certainly have to adapt your stories sometimes, don't you, for learning?
Yeah, definitely. Um, and I think, as I've mentioned before, one of the things that we do have, I don't know if it's a biological thing or within our actual psychology, we do favor learning through stories. It seems to be a really good vessel to learn. Going and that's kind of how like knowledge has been passed through many generations before we had this wonderful world of the internet. But now we're in the world of the internet and
Mm.
printed books and everything still seems to be delivered under the guise of a narrative or some sort of story as well. So I always wonder if that is just kind of we almost need that if we want to understand something on a deeper level, especially when it's something a little bit more, I don't know, esoteric, untangible, or even very complex, like philosophy. They always seem to be packaged within a parable or a story of some sort.
That's a good point. Yeah, when the concept becomes overly complex, it's almost like it invites the analysis. The analysis is part of the lesson,
Hmm. Yeah.
which perhaps with I don't know if Robert Kiyosaki follows that theorem as well, but that was certainly a big thing about a kind of a similar kind of famous book bit before his time, the Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill,
Hmm.
and certainly it was encouraged that you sort of overanalyze the book. In fact, he talked about the secrets that was hidden within the book, right? And I suppose the whole point of that really is to get people discussing it and talking about different parts of it, which helps the other kind of things sink in.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's quite um, a a comparison between like Napoleon Hill and Robert Kiyosaki because they are very similar in that sort of respect as well, they kind of have a lot of controversy around them, but
Mm.
also they have helped a lot of people, which is really funny. Like for example, Napoleon Hill, uh, I know he talked about having really intimate relationship with like Thomas Edison and um, all these other big business minds, and I think he barely spoke to them or something like that, and he was more or less kind of peddling these ideas that he already had under the guise that he taught with these people and stuff. But it didn't.
Mm.
But he actually had good ideas, so it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
weird because he was kind of a little bit of a con man, but
Mm-hmm.
also they worked. And you have these
Mm-hmm.
when you read biographies by like Steve Jobs or these uh, current intellectual masterful minds, they refer back to him about some of his
Uh-huh.
concepts like the mastermind
Mm-hmm.
idea of having
Yep.
strong mentors around you that help you push forward, a whole bunch of stuff. And maybe it is kind of like the obvious knowledge, but
Mm-hmm.
he's packaged it in a way where it's digestible. And does
Yep.
that mean that he was not masterful at teaching that thing,
Yeah.
or was he just
Well, I mean, it
masterful at
was
marketing?
I
Oh.
think it was quite a common thing at the time that people would embellish certain elements of things. It, you know, when they, because it, obviously you didn't have the internet back then, so there was no one to check it.
Hmm.
Because there's another famous book, which is a very good book. It was written in 1936 called "How to Win Friends and Influence People,"
Oh, Dale Carnegie.
and that's, well, Dale Carnegie, right? Who calls himself Dale Carnegie because of the association with Andrew
Andrew
Carnegie.
Carnegie. Yeah.
But his actual name is Dale Harbison Carnegie. It's a totally different name. It's
Oh,
not Carnegie at all.
really?
Yeah, yeah. He calls himself Carnegie because he wants the association with Andrew Carnegie, who was, everyone knew was a famous, steel entrepreneur, and he like blew up the steeling industry and made millions and millions and millions. So,
Oh, he was a
so
genius.
Napoleon Hill's not the only one who wanted that association.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost kind of like, I mean, nowadays we kind of have these influencers, and you know, you see them on YouTube and you see them on Instagram,
Mm.
and you're like, all your stuff is so obvious and everyone knows this. But they, you know, they keep you know, they get really really popular and they make a lot of money. But I think, you know, they just find ways to, I guess how it works is they just find ways to make it, you know, either as a narrative or more presentable, more marketable, more packaged. And I feel, as being a, you know, a teaching professional, that that is kind of a part of what you're doing when you're educating. You're you're taking some knowledge that, you know, I mean, with the internet now, anyone can go and learn English. You know, they don't necessarily need a teacher to, you know, learn English. They could, you know, download some books, they could watch some videos, they could do some apps, but maybe it doesn't stick for them. But if they find that teacher that kind of, that that's very adept at being able to present it in a way that would connect to them, then, you know, that's how they're going to learn better. There's
Mm.
lots of videos out there of him doing seminars. They're kind of all kind of like chopped up and stuff. So there wasn't anything particularly good, but there he does have like a video course that kind of goes along with some of these other products. And I've taken the liberty of taking some clips from that we can kind of look at and then kind of
Mhm.
discuss his principles of teaching. Maybe not so much within a classroom dynamic, because he's just kind of lecturing to screen, but just sort of his ideas and how he presents them, and how, you know, maybe is that
Mhm.
something that we would do in the classroom or not, or what is he actually doing. So
Mhm.
let's have a look at some of those clips
Yeah,
now.
totally.
One of the more important lessons my rich dad taught me, he said there was 4 types of people in the world of business or money, whatever he said. And this here are the 4 different types of people, and he called this the cash flow quadrant. So E stands for employee, S stands for self-employed, small business or specialist like a doctor or a lawyer. B stands for big business, 500 employees or more, and I stands for investor. Now the distinction here is this, is that each of these are 4 different types of people. They have 4 different tax laws for all 4 different types of people, and this is throughout the world. But it was my poor dad who always said to me, you know, son, go to school so you can get a job. So my poor dad wanted me to be an employee like him. And there's nothing wrong with that and all this, except the tax laws are the worst for employees. As Warren Buffett says, you know, he, as a business owner and investor, he pays a lower percentage rate than the employees. And many employees are having a tough time today. Not only is there high gas prices, but there's going to be higher taxes. My mother wanted me to become a doctor or a specialist or a small business person. And I said to my mom, S stands for smart. She says, you got a good point there, because I didn't do well in school, so I wasn't going to make it there. It was my rich dad who advised me to become an entrepreneur or a big business owner like Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, Michael Dell, all those guys who created Facebook and Yahoo and all this, or Google. And he wanted me to become an investor. So he started me playing the game of Monopoly, you know, 4 greenhouses, 1 red hotel. So I learned to be an investor, and I learned to be an entrepreneur. So the good news is, if you want to get rich, you can get rich in all 4 quadrants, okay? That's up to you. So if it's time for you to move from the E or the S over to the B or the I, the entrepreneur or the investor, then welcome. The Rich Dad website is the website for you.
All right. So yeah, it's very interesting. He obviously has a very interesting way of talking, and you know, the diagrams, the colored pens. You know, I like all that
I mean,
stuff.
that's
And
what I do
integrating this.
with the board stuff. Like when I'm writing out example sentences and stuff like that, I will use different pens, whatever focus it is
Yeah.
on. Especially if I'm looking for kind of like sentence structures. Like a red pen for verbs and a green pen for nouns, and
Yeah.
so it's kind of clear. It makes it clear what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I used to when I used to use a board, I used to I used to do it. Now because it's all online, then I can use all kinds of fancy stuff, or even with technology with IWBs. But when I was actually writing on a board, I would do lots of lots of colored pens and stuff. And he got his story in there, didn't he? He mentioned about his poor dad and his rich dad and whatever, and all of those narrative hooks. And one of the interesting things that I would say about it is. From a teaching perspective, I think that some people who jumped the gun might criticize it for being very chalk and talk, but I don't like that term, and I don't think it's very useful to criticize something as chalk and talk, unless it's boring chalk and talk. You know what I mean? I mean, this guy's interesting. You want to listen.
Yeah.
You want to listen, mind you. I'm probably coming at that from a bit of a language teacher perspective, which isn't necessarily, it's not really the case, is it here? So maybe there's a bit more to be said about chalk and talk. But yeah, I think as long as there is a hook, then people are going to listen. And it's interesting. I want to hear what he has to say next.
Yeah, and I like the organization is what I like, especially with a lot of his concepts. And he has a lot of fluff, but he has some very basic principles like that cash flow quadrant, and kind of expanded on it in his second book, and going into his board game, which we will look at later in this video. But the idea, I think, is, and what I try to do when I'm teaching English, is to find ways to either categorize or put certain language points together, or to connect them in a way that makes it kind of seamlessly cross together, or show how something fits within a larger frame. Because often you get these books of like, well, so here you are as an employee, for example, and this is all that you need to do as an employee to become rich. Whereas I feel like what he gives is more a macro level view, and I often find that one of the issues, especially with the English language teaching, is it keeps going. It focuses too much on the micro. It's either this lesson is grammar, this lesson is syntax, this lesson is vocabulary, but it often very rare that it pulls out to a macro level, and you get these points where you can see, oh, okay, so this is how it fits within this area, this is how it fits within this area. And that's what I like about his concepts, and what I try to do with, and I think is a good way of teaching, is that if you can fit whatever language or whatever teaching point that you have within that broader knowledge base that you've either built before or you're going to build going forward. I'll try and see if I can give an example. But when you are, I don't know, say talking about the past, and you're doing the regular past with the ed, and you're just talking about that, it's also a good point to kind of like tie it in, that pronunciation of the ed, but also of where they might kind of like find it they
Yeah.
might find it confusing when they use it as participles or as adjectives and stuff like that. So you can kind of just kind of pepper that in towards the end and kind of tie it in so we understand not that yes, the ed, we use it for the past regular, but there are broader aspects at play within the whole English language system. That's just off the top of my head. There's better
Yeah,
ways that
yeah,
I've done it,
yeah. No,
but
I can see where you're going with that.
yeah.
Yeah. You're right that I think sometimes there's a bit too much focus on, as you might say, the micro, even to the extent where you sort of decide that a lesson is going to be about the past simple. Maybe that's not a particularly good thing to do. Um, certainly not a sort of intermediate and above. Maybe we should be thinking in a slightly different way. Maybe instead the lesson should be about telling a story in the past, and through that, the past
What?
simple is one of the elements. And another one is the past continuous, and another one is things that may or may not be too advanced for the students at the time, but they can still be there. They can learn. Everyone can learn things phrasally.
Mm.
You don't have to apply the grammar and use the rules necessarily. So you can always just teach a language chunk and throw something on there, can't you?
And I
But
think
yeah, no, I think.
carry on. Well,
No, I was just gonna say how it ties into. I don't know if we think we might have like a slight delay, which is just enough for us to do that. So yeah, no, just that it ties in as that thing, and you're absolutely right. I think a lot of theorists even would agree with you these days. The common idea is that we should be thinking more about the implication, the practicality, the final task, the communicative aim,
yeah,
not so much the individual grammar, whatever point.
it's weird because it's I we do need grammar and to talk about grammar and phonetics, phonemics even, and lexi and all of this stuff. But it often is the can often be a barrier for many people because they have so much tied up within it. It's like, oh no, I can't do grammar. But if we, like you say, focus on doing it as a narrative, then anyone can engage with a story, and from that story, if it's about the past, then that it's going to come up, and it's kind of like that whole Mary Poppins idea of uh, the sugar that makes the medicine go down. And I just think that we seem to be set as a species. We seem to be set up that way. I'd love to, if anyone knows of any sort of research or books, kind of regards that, please leave some comments below, and we can kind of delve into it, and not make me feel like I'm some sort of conspiracy theorist. But it's but it seems to be the way once you kind of get through that initial stage of kind of like, okay, so this is what this is, and this is what that is. This is you need to just repeat these words, but you have a certain level, then it's easier to kind of jump in through engage with the focus on engagement and communication rather than
Yeah.
the the brick and mortar of the language, which is often more difficult to kind of deal with because it's concepts that we don't really think about day to day life. I don't go, I'm using a verb now. I'm gonna use a noun. I'm gonna put this. Or when you're using adjectives before nouns, you're like, oh, what adjective should I use first? Should it be the
Yeah, it's
talking about
funny
the
because it is a,
size
it
and
is a
then the
common.
color and
Yeah, right. It is a common issue that teachers have. Language teachers have it, and I think we can probably see, easily how it would transfer into other areas. This idea that people want the techniques, they don't want the mindset. So we've got Robert Kiyosaki here talking about mindset.
yeah,
He's talking about are you, is your overall kind of feeling that you're an employee or you're self-employed or whatever, and we have a similar thing, in language teaching, that we're talking about, it's just about communicating, but then the customer sort of asks for it, don't they? Say, yeah, but what do I do? They might say to Robert Kiyosaki, where do I put my money?
Yeah.
How do I make, what do I do? What's the action? What next action do I take? And it's the same thing in the English language classroom, where someone might say, teacher, but what is this? What is let me think of a good example here. What does at mean? Teacher, what does at mean?
What?
At?
Yeah, and it's kind of.
I don't know what at means.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone knows what at means. You know what I mean? And if you're a student who can't let that go, or you have a student who can't let that go, then it's going to hinder them.
Yeah.
They're clinging to that.
But it's almost like they're started to fall down this rabbit hole of, well, what are actually words? What is language? When I say hello, is hello an actual?
Exactly.
It's not an actual thing. When you kind of think about it, it's just something that we assign meaning to.
Am I commanding? Yeah. Well, that's applied. That is actually applied linguistics. It's discourse analysis.
Yeah.
It's just this idea that, yeah, if someone says hello, am I commanding you to say hello back? And if you don't, then you're refusing, because it's kind of weird if you say hello and they don't say something back, then they're refusing your command, which is why you feel upset. I don't know. You can get into all kinds of weird.
I know. Are you just like you just try to learn English? don't
Yeah.
focus so much on that. But it's where that line is,
yeah.
and it's kind of very similar to like physics and quantum physics, where that we have these rules in physics, and then when we get to down to that minute quantum level, they have their own set of laws. Yet at some point they converge, and one set of laws moves into the smaller, minute quantum physics, moves into the larger, broader physics. But where is that line? And it's kind of similar in language learning. Is we do need to utilize these building blocks initially to kind of spoon feed some nouns and yada yada, all that sort of thing that people think about with language teaching. But then at a certain point it starts to be, well, we need to talk more in narrative. It becomes more of, well, okay, now we've got a framework, how are we going to communicate? And it's interesting in that regard. And I feel he does a good job of moving away, like you say, from techniques to that mindset. And I think that's what, for me, is a good indicator of a teaching master, is if they can effectively, concisely, and simply put forward a mindset that people are then able to utilize to learn effectively.
Yeah, I mean, in language teaching, that's what they call autonomous learner training. But yeah, of course, it's something that exists in all forms of teaching. And a good teacher is teaching someone to no longer need a teacher. Because otherwise,
that's a quote, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, that's the teacher Rich. Good teacher. Professor Rich Professor Rich said in 2021, people will remember this for decades. Can't remember what I said, but it was good.
It's funny because the way you say it, it's like those old story tropes of like the Yodas and the Mr. Miyagi's and stuff like that. You're teaching your students to be able to kind of like teach themselves or whatever. You're kind of putting yourself out of a job.
It's the give a man a fish thing, isn't it? Give a man a fish, blah blah blah. Give a man a fish, and he'll sell it for firewood or whatever. But
and he becomes a pescatarian and. Wait, no, that's not how it goes.
Anyway, it's about self-sufficiency, isn't it, of the students? Yeah.
As I said, starting at the age of 9, my rich dad started teaching me to be a rich man by playing the game Monopoly. So in 1994,
I
my
hated
wife
that
Kim and
game,
I
to be
decided,
honest.
why don't we put onto a game
I still
board
hate it. It's too much
what my
RNG.
rich dad taught
Yeah.
me, so people can have fun learning. So this here is the cash flow game. There's actually two game boards. This is the first one. The first thing here you notice there's two tracks. This is called the fast track, and this is called the rat race. And most people are trapped in the rat race. So if you follow the advice of go to school and get a safe, secure job and buy a house and have kids, you get stuck inside this rat race and you never get out. So the object of the cash flow game is to increase your financial IQ so you can get out of the rat race, to have more passive income so you don't have to work anymore, so your money's working hard for you. Then you get on the fast track. Now, there really does exist a fast track. In 1933, a man named Joseph Kennedy, father of President John Kennedy, head of the, I think it was the SEC, declared that the fast track was only for rich guys and women. So you had to be a rich person to invest on the fast track. So today, the investments I do are not in the rat race. I don't buy stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. I invest out here. So to invest out here, number one, you have to be rich, and number two, you should be financially educated. The reason so many pro athletes and movie stars lose their money is they have the money, but they don't have the financial education. So they get taken by some of the biggest land sharks on planet Earth who operate out here. So if you're going to be out here, you need two things, money and education. So that's what this game board is designed to do, and it's to assist you to get out of the rat race and onto the fast track. So this is the first game board of the cash flow game, and now we'll go on to the second game board. And this, you may recognize, is a financial statement. This financial statement is what separates cash flow from the game of Monopoly. This financial statement here,
I'm intimidated already.
Very important aspect of your financial education. For example, is my banker has never asked me for my report card. My banker has never asked me, if I had good grades, what school I went to. When I go to borrow money, millions of dollars, my banker wants to see my financial statement. So in the real world, outside of school, this is your report card. Your financial statement tells the banker how smart you are, or do you need remedial education, So cash flow, the game was designed to make this,
such a
which
good
is
job.
technically known as accounting, the single most boring subject on earth, fun. So cash flow teaches you two things.
Wow.
It takes the most boring subject on earth.
I've got to say, I'm
which
quite
is
impressed.
Accounting, married with the most
I
terrifying
don't know if
subject
he's just
on
selling
earth,
me here,
which
but
is
he's definitely
investing,
sold me, I
and
think.
we put it together in a game. So this here is a very important aspect of the cash flow game. It's what separates Monopoly from cash flow. So let's go back to the cash flow game, and I'll explain how putting both accounting and investing together is a very important educational tool for your financial education. So now you've seen the second board game, which is a financial statement, and that part can be intimidating to some people, especially if you're not good with numbers or words or just getting. So let me explain to you why games are so important. As a child, I didn't do well in school. Every time I made a mistake,
Can we
the teacher
pause
would
this for a second?
punish me.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Yeah.
I wanted to just point out, so when he talks about the board game being split into two, because I actually have the board game, but I have the app. They've got an app version, a mobile game version of it, and it's great. And when he talks about it split into two parts, it really is like the first part, the rat race. Basically, it's kind of like Monopoly, and that you go around this rat race in a circle, and if you don't buy anything, you're just collecting the money from go, except instead of collecting money from go, you're collecting money from your paycheck, your job. And then going around the rat race, you can make investments where you either buy real estate to either rent or invest, or you can buy stocks or buy small shares in companies and stuff like that. And then there's other points where like you pick up the community chest equivalent of from Monopoly, and bad things happen, like he says, there's some funny ones, because it's like, oh, you've got a divorce, or you've had a child. Minus $1,000. Some of it made me laugh out loud. You decided to buy a boat. Minus 50,000 or something like that. It's really funny. But then you kind of get this idea of like, well, if you invest in these real estate deals or stocks, occasionally something will pop up like, oh, this this stock did a boom growth, and like they had or
uh,
something like that, and then you end up with more money. You see how you get more money from making these
mm,
uh, shrewd investments in stocks and real
yeah,
estates than you do from just going
yeah,
around the board collecting go. Once you have
yeah,
enough money, you
mm,
move on to the fast track, and then with the fast track, it's just basically how do you invest that into
yeah,
like corporations and other businesses and stuff like that. So it's a
right.
very
Interesting.
it's a very interesting and sometimes kind of thought-provoking game, because you don't
Yeah.
often play a game where
Mm.
it's directly linked to real life, and you can
Yeah.
it's funny in that regard, and you're like, well, I do really well in this board game, but I do really shit in real life. It doesn't seem to work that way. Once you kind of get good at this board game, you're like, oh shit, I know what to do. It's hard to not do it in real life, because you can
Wow.
see how you're pulling from the community chest and going, oh,
Yeah.
I've bought a boat, and you realize that actually that didn't
Right.
add any assets to your portfolio.
Ah,
It's
yeah,
just you've
yeah.
just lost a ton of
Oh, I've
money.
bought a £400 microphone. Hmm.
Well, but
Although
that would be
now I can do my ASMR stream though. Hey guys, hello.
exactly, and that then becomes a cash flowing asset,
Yeah. No,
and
you're
then
right. It could be a money producing asset, couldn't it? We shall see. That's
no.
it, guys. Send me money, PayPal, ELT under the covers at gmail.com.
This is the business model derived from Robert Kiyosaki,
So yeah,
begging for
random
money on
people
the
on
internet.
YouTube are going to come in and send us money on PayPal. All we need is one millionaire to send us £1 million, and then we can get on the fast track. Yeah, I like it, man. I really like it. I mean, even without playing the game, it's already got me thinking. And as you said, I read the book and I quite like the book. It does make some good points. People might say he's a snake oil salesman or whatever, but I don't think so. I think there's definitely some concepts in there which make a lot of sense to me. And
Mhm.
I think it's really good the way he redefines how you think about things. You just start thinking about assets and liabilities, you know, and you start to realize what's an asset and what's a liability and things like that. And yeah, I think it's useful. Mm.
And especially that second part of the board game with the where it's the financial statement.
Mm.
It's I don't know about you, but it could be quite. I feel for me, it could be quite intimidating when you're talking about
Mm.
taxes and ingoings, outgoings, and having
Mm.
to kind of think about money management, because it's not
Mm.
really taught in schools. And you know I grew
Mm.
up in a situation where it's like you don't really talk about money at the dinner table, because it's kind of it's
Mm.
uncouth or something like that. There's kind of always a bit of a
Mm.
stigma around it, like talking with religion or politics.
Mm.
So for it to be laid out in a simple way that's also um, is fun and
Yeah.
engaging,
Yeah.
it's fantastic. And
Very good.
it's the same with language.
Mm.
There's so many people that have terrible language experiences in school or in life,
Mm.
learning a language, and they're so intimidated. Yeah,
Yeah.
it could be so much fun if presented in the right way. And
Yeah.
one of the
Yeah.
jobs as a teacher is doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're going to make a game to teach someone something, that's pretty cool.
yeah.
I like it. I know people have talked about that for language. I mean, people have obviously there are people who've done it, but I've worked with people who've been big into like uh, making video games for language learning and stuff like that. It's a good tool. And to be honest, it looks a lot more fun than Monopoly. Not that that's particularly difficult. Monopoly is a terrible game. I don't understand why anyone likes playing it. It's like one step up from Snakes and Ladders. Um, but yeah, I guess it's because I play video games that I think like that. Um, but yeah, no, it looks good. It looks more complex.
Well, actually, I think
The art,
what
I'm not sure I like the aesthetics. It looks a bit cheesy, kind of
yeah,
whatever.
I
But
think he's really kind of
yeah,
copied Monopoly in that sense. But what I was going to say was Monopoly is basically a game of, it's, almost kind of like finance. It's about finances, but it's not about financial education. So I guess you would be better if you understood finances and business. You might do better at Monopoly. I don't know, but it's an example of if it were to be teaching about financial education, it's not doing it. It's doing a terrible job.
I'm
If that
pretty
was
sure
the aim.
The best strategy in Monopoly is to buy everything. So the only thing that makes it interesting is if you do the auction system. And then it's kind of like you have to put a value on it yourself rather than the value that's on the board, because the value of everything on the board is too cheap.
Yeah.
Right. So everything is worth it on the board. It's only when you start putting the auction in that, it becomes a thing where people bid, and then there's the strategic element of outbidding someone to stop them from getting the third thing and, all that kind of stuff. But it's still a game of luck.
Yeah. But let's see what else he's put into this board game, because he's got a couple of more interesting ideas.
Okay.
I don't have a good memory. I was probably ADD, it's hyperfidgety and all this stuff.
No shit.
So the reason I love games, and the reason I created the
That was
Cash
probably
Flow game is whether you
ADD.
did well in school
Americans
or
just
not,
throw those
the
terms
more you
around,
play
don't they?
this game, the smarter you
Yeah,
get.
I've got
And the
OCD.
problem with my poor dad was
I've
he
got
thought
what's the other
making
one?
mistakes was bad. Look, the only place that's bad is in school. In the real world, the person who makes the most mistakes and learns from it wins. So the reason I created the Cash Flow board game to get you out of the rat race is you can play this game over and over and over. I want you to make as many mistakes as you can. We have cash flow clubs and cash flow franchises. You can play this game for free or for a very nominal cost. But I hear so many people say, well, I played the game once. I said, well, how do you learn anything once? You don't learn to be a great golfer playing once. You don't learn to drive just driving once. True education is about repetitive, making mistakes, trying new things, and learning. So the beauty of the cash flow game is have fun. Make as many mistakes as you can. Play it as often as you can. Take risks. It's only playing money. Have a good time. And the cash flow clubs have a 10-lesson curriculum. Go through the 10 lessons. Join with like-minded people, but have fun. Make mistakes. The reason my poor dad was poor was because he was terrified of making a mistake. And I don't want you to make mistakes financially in the real world. I don't want you to pay somebody to lose your money. Play this game as many times as you take until you get comfortable that you understand how to get out of the rat race, on the fast rate, how assets, how liabilities work. But have fun, practice, make as many mistakes as possible, and that's how you get financially smarter.
Yeah, I think he made some interesting and good points. About lecturing can be boring, even though he, like as you say, is kind of doing the kind of chalk and talk or whatever. But I think there's a difference with the way that he's doing it, though.
Yeah. Well, obviously there's levels of chalk and talk. I mean, it reminds me of the thing that Jamie Keddy said about, like, what's the point of talking about teacher talk in terms of quantity? It should be teacher talk quality. And I think the same thing can be applied to all kinds of things that we might criticize in teaching. The teachers doing too much chalk and talk. Well, it completely depends what's going on. I mean, if you were doing 90 minutes of chalk and talk, but the students were hooked on every word, that's amazing, isn't it? Even if it's language teaching, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because it's like if we're going to recommend things like watching a film or watching a TV series at home, is that not what we're doing basically? We're basically prescribing some chalk and talk in the form of recorded media. I think there's things to be said about chalk and talk. Obviously, it's a terrible term that has all kinds of horrible implications of some boring guy at the front saying 2 + 2 is 4, etc. But and writing it in chalk. But it doesn't have to be that. Anyway, yeah, I think he has a very interesting way of talking about things. I find it fascinating, and he's got lots of concepts.
Yeah.
And yeah, go on.
The idea of using games, board games in class, I mean, is is one of the core things that I try to use, especially with young learners. Not necessarily including board games. I have used them before, and often it's more your kind of you've got to choose the board game for the the different language points that you're covering, or it's often easier if it's like Lexi. You can kind of choose a board game that has kind of similar Lexi, or Lexi that you can kind of swap out, with terms in the board game and stuff like that. Even simple stuff, like when you're doing directions, pin the tail on the donkey.
Yeah.
When you have that, you have the simulation, you have the actual context to use the language.
Yeah.
I think pin the tail on the donkey is a good example, because that is what it's supposed to be used for. All that functional language that rather than just having them fill out worksheets, or just do these I don't know, speaking exercises where they're not actually moving around is redundant. It should be within the context, and as Robert points out, it's, if you use these games, it's as often a safe way to use language to make mistakes with whatever you're learning in a safe way, because it's just a game. It's just a game. So you can practice again and again and again and again and again. And that's, I feel like, one of the big components in my classes. You have maybe a bit of chalk and talk, maybe explaining or going over certain points language points that you want to do, and then just setting them off on an activity. And often one of those activities, especially when it's young learners, is a game. And then they just get to play with the language. And play is the highest form of learning. That's Einstein.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have my own quote,
really
Professor
Einstein?
Rich.
Did you? Wait, no, but was that actually Einstein?
It could be Einstein, or it could be a meme where someone put
put
those words onto Einstein. I actually think it's Einstein. But
right.
the internet can prove me wrong.
Apparently Einstein's one of the most misquoted people in the world. But yeah, brilliant. No, yeah.
I think that was one of his quotes.
I'm down with all. I'm down with all that.
I mean, do you have a perspective? Have you used like games in board games and stuff in class at all, or?
Yeah, of course. I use those kind of rubbishy games that you get in the teacher resource packs and stuff. Yeah, they are all right. They are. Oh, yeah, they have a time and a place. But I'm a bit of a game connoisseur, and games have taught me a lot. I can sort of name emperors of the Roman Empire, and I can tell you more or less when the Roman Empire split and when it fell and what happened after that and who was the first king of England, and all this kind of stuff. All this is from games. And follow-ups from games. So if I play a game and I get interested, and then I read something about it and learn more. So games have taught me tons about stuff, about physics in space. I understand how orbits work, and I know how you adjust an orbit to get from orbiting one body to another body. I understand why you can't just go in a straight line. That's from Kerbal Space Program, right? So there's, games have taught me absolutely tons about all kinds of stuff, and I think they're great learning devices. I think the problem is really spending enough time to make a game with an actual learning process. That normally goes wrong. When people actually sit down and go, I want to teach this thing, so I'm going to make this game, it normally doesn't work. In fact, I think making a good game is actually pretty damn difficult.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about using for a game to use in the classroom, silly board game or whatever, but an actual good game. It's a difficult thing to do. So to actually put something on that to say, well, the aim of this game is to teach people stuff. Well, then it could get even more difficult. That's kind of like setting yourself up, like saying the aim of this lesson is to teach the present perfect. It's a terrible objective for a lesson.
Yeah.
You never want to put that.
I mean, the aim of the board game should be to generally win the board game. not to
Yeah, well,
learn
sure,
something.
or it could be, yeah, or just has to be engaging and fun, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even if you lose, and it's still fun. Could be still fun. So yeah, I think that's my issue, and that's probably why I don't use more games in my classes, because I kind of judge them quite harshly, and I kind of think, we'll just be better off, especially since now I'm doing lots of one-to-one classes, just be better off having a debate or an interesting discussion or whatever. But it's something I would like to do, and I have even toyed with the idea of using actual video games in online classes. I'm just quite nervous about doing it because it could easily be seen as like, why am I paying this guy to play games with me? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that could be a whole subset of teaching. Why wouldn't
I mean,
someone pay a game
I think it.
to play, to learn, and play a game at the same time?
I mean, as long as they're getting the benefit of actually having a teacher on the other as the other player, which you're explaining things, you're guiding them, you're helping them along the way, then it could be quite good. See, one thing I've thought about is doing single player games. So it's a single player game, but they are directing the game, so they have to communicate to direct me to do things in the game.
Kind of like that
kind of
TV series Nightmare. Do you remember that?
Yeah, kind of like Nightmare. Yeah, kind of like Nightmare. Yeah.
Great show. I think that's what makes Cash Flow all the more impressive, is that it's fun, it's engaging, and you learn. So this guy's done Rich Dad Poor Dad, Cash Flow Quadrant, these great books that help people understand the basic principles around finances and business and investing education. And then he's also been able to put that within a board game, and and he's made that board game fun, engaging, and they learn as well. I'm like, that's why I brought him up into this teaching mastery, because we both know how difficult that is. And further to add to that, I mean, I have used board games in class. I've used games, often like word games like Mad Libs and stuff like that, or Apples to Apples, which lend themselves, or even why you have young learners, so Cards Against Humanity, not so much, but I have used variants of that and with older students. But I just want to refer people back to our interview that we had with Brandy Teacher, who basically had her own school with the majority of her lessons revolved around not just teaching English, but doing it via board games. She has a big wealth and array of board games. She's currently working on her own for English teaching, and hopefully we'll get a follow-up with her soon of what she's been coming up with. But she always says that she kind of tries to match the game to the learner, or to whatever point that it is. So it's not necessarily that she's trying to do like a cash flow and just have a game that teaches the English point, but it's a game that can be utilized as an activity to further reinforce or practice that point. And that's kind of my approach with board games and games in general. So check that interview out, because there's some nuggets in there that you should definitely check out on our YouTube channel, ELT Under the Covers, Brandy Teacher. Do you have anything more to add about this gamification?
I think it's a topic you could dive deeply into, but it's not something, weirdly enough, even though my passion is gaming, it's not something that I really have a lot to say about, actually. I know a guy who does, though, which would be interesting to have him on. But not particularly. Oh, there is this there's the Pavlovian thing, isn't it? People might start critiquing the Pavlovian aspect of games. People should be learning the language just because they love the language or whatever, rather than giving them a synthetic reward. Bollocks. Pavlovian stuff's good.
There's a certain element of moving from the extrinsic to the intrinsic. It's a spectrum, and there is a fine line of are you playing the game to
Yeah.
play the game and win the game, or are you playing the
Yeah.
game to practice your language and something
I
like
can. I
that?
mean,
But
I can. I can. The thing is, Neil, I can tell you what the prograde of an orbit is, and I never would have learnt that because of an intrinsic desire to know that. You know what I mean? So it obviously works. You know, it obviously works.
I got
Okay.
the cone of learning. I love the
Yeah,
title. The cone of
Several years
learning.
ago, Arizona State
that's going to
University
be my nickname for my new microphone.
You should do like
came by
a
to
cone head kind
evaluate
of
the
thing.
value of our
Oh
cash
yeah,
flow
very
game.
nice.
Could it really be used as a teaching tool? And thank God they found out it was a great tool. They evaluated students who were in the MBA program, and could the cash flow game enhance their knowledge of business, investing, and finance and things like that? So one of the things that Arizona State came up with, this was from Professor Dale, which came out in 1969, which I thought was very interesting. So I said, I didn't do well in school. And this thing here is called the cone of learning. And what they found out is people like me don't do well in school because the worst way to learn is by reading. Those of you buying my books, keep buying books. So I didn't do well in school because I'm a very poor reader. The second worst way of learning is hearing words or lecture. So kids like me in school just don't do well because I fidget a lot, I don't like lecture, and I'm a poor reader. So you can go up and it says you can watch a movie, watching a demonstration and all this, and this is all kind of passive learning. So being hyperactive and probably ADD, this is not the way I learn. So the reason I like games and the reason the cash flow game is a valuable teaching tool is when you go to active. Now, the best way to learn is do the real thing. For instance, if you want to invest in real estate, the best thing you can do is go do it. If you want to play the stock market, you got to do it. The second best thing, though, is simulating the real experience. And what Arizona State found was the cash flow game was as close to simulation of the real thing, which is why I say the game was designed for you to play over and over and over again, to make mistakes, to learn, to correct, to adjust your brain. So that's why I love games, and I'm really glad to find out way back in 1969, Professor Dale found out the same thing I already knew, that by playing games and having fun is one of the best ways you can learn. So even if you didn't do well in school or not, just by playing the game, you get smarter and smarter, you learn the vocabulary, learn how numbers work and all this. So this is a big part of the Rich Dad experience. Once you understand the game in our books, then we have Rich Dad's coaching, we have Rich Dad's education, we have Medium and advanced seminars. But once you're ready to move on, when you feel
Upselling.
confident in your ability to learn. So after you've done that, then you go do the real thing.
Yeah, I think we get the main point.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we'll need like a marker of that, won't we? So my critique a little bit. Well, he's selling his game, isn't he?
Yeah.
With that, I mean, the cone of learning sounds great. It looked great. The descriptions of it throughout the thing look very interesting, and I think there's something to be said for that. Definitely, the idea that doing. You see, there's a few caveats for me. First of all, I mean, you can't just say doing, right? There's more to it than that, because
Well, Gladwell calls it deliberate practice.
it's not even just that, though. Well, maybe it is. I don't know a lot about Gladwell, so it might be. So basically, my one thing I think of, and I remember years and years ago when I was in Valencia, I used to think about this. And it was the people they call perro flautas, right? The guys who are playing music on the street. And these guys would be playing music on the street like 10 hours a day, every day throughout the summer at least, and most of the spring and sometimes the winter. So they're having insane amounts of practice. And year after year, you'd see the same people as well doing it. But they never got better, or let's say not all of them got better. Maybe some of them did get better and they disappeared. And that's why I never saw them again, because they went off and become famous musicians. But certainly some of them didn't get better. They playing the same songs, and it sounds kind of, it's kind of okay, but not, not like you'd go, oh my God, what a great musician, and that's after years of practicing for like 10 hours a day. You think the guy would be incredible. So the point is that doing does not necessarily facilitate learning. It can do, But like you say, there's that deliberate practice, but I think there's all kinds of elements. Sometimes you just get to a you just get stuck. You know, it's remember, I don't know if I was explaining to it at some point on, I think our previous episode or something like that, about the way that I was holding the guitar pick and how I used
Yep.
to hold it kind of a weird way when I first started learning. And the reason why I found out that was a weird way is because I think my cousin pointed it out to me, and then I went on the internet and checked. You know, so first of all, someone pointed it out to me, and then I checked on the internet, and then I had to redefine. You know, I had to change my technique totally. And when I changed my technique, it was actually more difficult at first. So if it was just me on my own practicing, and I practiced that wrong way, and then I changed it, and I was like, oh no, that doesn't work, and I'd go back, no, because my self would be telling me, oh no, that doesn't work. So sometimes you can't always see what the best way is, you know, which is why it's good to have like teachers, like, you know, guides, people who can guide you, point things out.
That's where he might have
also-
actually gone wrong then, rather than saying that the top level is real life, that maybe the simulation, the game, should be the top, because you have this guide, these boundaries, this framework for which that you can practice, but also it's very clear where your mistakes are, and you can, well, even that same thing, you
I
could
don't
just
know,
keep playing. You could keep
it'd have to
playing
be
the
a
game
really
and just
good-
going around in circles
Yeah.
and stuck constantly.
No,
on-
you definitely,
Yeah.
you definitely can do that, and that's why guides for games exist, isn't it? You know, the video games that I play, I'm often reading strategy guides and things like that, because if it was just about brute forcing for me to discover the best strategy, then, you know, that would take thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. I'd be bored to death of the game by the time I got good at it, right? And like chess, you know, I mean, people actually read test books. See, this is where I also disagree with the thing about reading, is you can get golden nuggets of information from books.
Yeah.
So it might be true that it's a terrible way of, you know, just, oh, I'm going to read all these books and become super intelligent. But if it's like, oh, I'm mastering this skill and now I need to learn this specific technique, oh, I'll read this book about, you know, how can you get good at fluently speaking in a British accent or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's a lot of
nuggets
nuance
wisdom.
that is missing out, isn't there? You know, like with
Yeah.
I think he's just thinking you just read the book, but then you have the knowledge, but you don't actually practice, you know, what you've read. Whereas he's thinking, well, with the game, you're learning about it, but also you're practicing it. And like you say, that's not always the case. You can read a book and then go, all right, let me try this.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but you know, I think what you're kind of looking at is kind of is funny is that he's kind of got his own little pedagogy going on, his own little
And it's good.
principles, and
moving
can
towards
you
doing
can
is
you
definitely
elaborate
good.
on that? You know, like what makes you say good?
Well, I mean, the thing I really like is the simulation thing, and it's what he's using to sell his book, isn't it? But I think if you can get a simulation that's sufficiently accurate, then it can definitely teach you certain things. You know, a very obvious example would be an actual flight simulator. Pilots learn to fly using flight simulators first. Okay, then you move on to flying up with a co-pilot, and then you know eventually you're a pilot, right? That's how it works. So flight simulators work. They use them in the real world. NASA used simulators before they would send astronauts up in the rocket, right? Yeah, simulations work when they're really, you know, when they're good. On the other hand, you can play all the Guitar Hero in the world that you want, and it ain't going to help you play guitar. Okay, so that would be like a bad simulation, right? Because you could call that a guitar simulator, but it's not a very good guitar simulator. So obviously you have to be careful about quality. You can't just say, you know, because I could argue that a really well-written guide to playing guitar could teach you, someone who's never touched a guitar more, it could teach them more than if they just picked up Guitar Hero and started plucking away. And therefore, in that circumstance, a really good, well-written book would be better than a crappy simulation, right? So there's obviously caveats, isn't there?
Yes.
But when I say good, I think obviously he's nailing certain things, because this doing and this idea of simulation, it fulfills a lot of criteria of learning, right? because doing is kind of intrinsically engaging, and also it involves you sort of working things out, which means you're involved intellectually. It's more likely to evoke an emotive response than just words on a page, and all of those things are things which increase your chance to learn something, to actually remember it. And we know that, and that's why we try to use stuff like that in the classroom, don't we? We try to make it emotive and active, and people stand up and do silly things. And we do, even little crappy exercises like board rush, which basically achieve nothing other than to just get people to jump out their seats and stand up and do, shall we say, the students themselves writing the words on the board.
Yeah.
Right. That actually increases their chances of learning something than just passively seeing it. So this is what I mean by this. There's some good. There's a good core to this pedagogy.
Yeah, we definitely can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I think it would be very silly to say that he's just marketing and selling. At the core, there's good principles that are delivered effectively, concisely, and simply. Uh, of they and they make financial and business investing education very accessible.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what I'm about. I want
Yeah.
whatever knowledge point, be it English that I teach or anything,
Yeah.
to be accessible. They should be
Yeah.
no boundaries to learning. The basic principles, I think, of being a teacher is that you're finding ways to make it so anyone can get access to this. I feel like I'm going into my utopian world, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it sounds a bit utopian. I was thinking. I mean,
But yeah, no, it's an
are you
ideal.
gonna teach a blind man to read?
That's on the next episode, Rich. You gave it away.
Yeah.
But
We're trying to make reading accessible to everyone, including blind people.
the tools that he uses, his seminars, his approach as a speaker, his books, his board game, and all of that together, I think, really proves himself, proves Robert as a teaching master. I don't know if he considers himself as an educator. I know he calls Rich Dad an educational company, and I would say he's right. If he upsells you on courses and all that sort of stuff, fine. Are you getting value?
Yeah.
And I think there is value there.
I mean, some of the content that's contained in his teaching, right, is intrinsically incredibly dull, or it on the surface it's incredibly dull, and he's making it interesting and it sticks in your head.
Yeah.
Things like, I mean, like I say, one of the big things I got from that book was that idea of the assets and liabilities. God damn, what boring words.
Yeah.
Assets and liabilities, who the hell wants to learn about that? Right? But some of the things that he said about them have really stuck in my head because of the story, the narrative, the way he presents it. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's pedagogical ideology driving the way that he presents his message, whether he knows it or not.
Yeah, and Robert, if you are watching this, big fans, we would love to have you on the show. We'd love to kind of nitpick your brain of how you came up with this. I know that your father, I don't know if you know this, Robert's father was the professor in education, I believe professor. I think he was like almost the top educational, like a minister or top education guy in Hawaii. So I wonder, Robert, if any of that bled into your thinking in combining stuff that your poor dad said with with your rich dad, because for us it comes through as quite clear pedagogy. I don't know how much of that is
interesting,
you've
yeah.
thought
Yeah,
thought
what is
about, but we'd
intentional?
love to hear your thoughts on
Yeah.
the development of your books, your games, your approach to educating. Please, if you watch this, you know, give us a message, and you know, we'd love to have you on and talk with you and your approach to educating, to teaching. It would be absolutely fantastic. Do you have anything more that you'd like to add, Rich, about Robert? Or
I think for well, I think the gamification thing is something we should return to at some point in a future discussion. Um,
definitely, if
Great,
if you're
great,
wanting
yeah,
to see more of this gamification discussion, please leave some comments below. Give us some suggestions of other people
yeah,
that you found that have got
yeah,
good gamification of their education. It
yeah.
doesn't have to be English. You know, we're open to stuff outside of language teaching, as we've gone through today with Robert Kiyosaki. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And do remember to smash that like button, hit subscribe, send an email to all your family members telling them they have to watch ELT Under the Covers. And I guess it's over to Neil to wrap up.
yeah, and to have a wonderful day. But also to remember to check out more of my stuff, because I have done a lot of gamification with my PowerPoint games and lessons. They're all on teamteacherchina.com. You can download them for free and use them instantly. I just want you to help with your education, educating your students. You know, it doesn't matter so much about all that money stuff. Maybe it should. Maybe that's something that I should have learned from Rich Dad, Poor Dad. But that's by the by. So teamteachchina.com, all those PowerPoint games, lessons, Team Teach China on the YouTube, where we kind of give you guides on how to use those, along with teaching in China and living in China. Team Teacher Baby, which is where I take all these principles of teaching and put it into my parenting, and you can follow that journey on YouTube for Team Teacher Baby, and Teach Teacher English, where I take some of those PowerPoint lessons and I turn them into standalone videos that you can do for homework or self-study lessons. And Professor Rich.
So if you want to interact with Professor Rich, then do weekly live streams.
Fantastic.
YouTube.com/Professor Rich. Basically like an Ask Me Anything aimed at language learners, but language teachers are welcome. Normally we're talking about language, though, maybe non-native language teachers. But I'll take questions about teaching as well. If you're a newish teacher, you'd like some guidance from an old dog, then youtube.com/Professor Rich. And I'm not sure there's anything else I'd like to advertise at the moment. Maybe just keep it at that. Just remember to smash that like button. I know we've already done it. Smash that like button.
Yeah.
Smash it.
Subscribe. Share.
Subscribe.
Comment.
Yeah, post on other people's videos and tell them they have to come on ELT Under the Cover. Just harass people until they watch. Thank you.